distribution, and in particular how things have changed in the last 10 years in distribution and what things might look like in the future. And before we get started, I just want to have everyone introduce themselves. So Tom, can you start?
Good morning, everybody. I am the founder and CEO of a company called Neon. We're less than 10 months old. We have released a few films this year. We're currently releasing a movie called I, Tonya, which strangely enough is a mock doc about Tonya Harding. And earlier this year we released Laura Poitras's film Risk, as well as Errol Morris's The B-Side. Prior to that, I worked at a great company called Magnolia, and before that I worked at Samuel Goldwyn. I forgot one minor iteration. I launched a little boutique division. Yes, maybe I've dropped this from my memory. A little boutique division called Radius at the Weinstein Company.
Where Tom actually released a film that I produced called The Hunting Ground about sexual assault.
Yes. Which was the best thing that happened there, frankly.
Hi, good morning. I'm Ariana Bacco. I run acquisitions for IFC Films and Sundance Selects. Sundance Selects being the label we release our documentaries under. Currently, we have two documentaries in the market right now. One called Dealt, about a blind magician named Richard Turner. Excuse me. And then the other is a film called, oh my God, I'm blanking. Sorry, it's too early in the morning. I'll skip that. But last year we had a film called Wiener that was in the market.
Little film
called Wiener. And we have quite a few on the docket for next year as well.
And I'm Dan Cogan. I run a company called Impact Partners, which finances documentaries and produces them sometimes and sells them to these guys if we can. So let me take you back for a second to 2007 and the landscape at that moment. And it's 10 years ago, but it might as well be an eternity. There's no Netflix as we understand it. Streaming is not particularly important. Netflix is at that point a DVD mail order company. There's no peak TV. You don't have an endless volume of stuff coming into your home. The companies dominating the documentary distribution space, at least on the television side, which was then the most important side of the business still, were PBS and HBO. We're about to enter a massive global downturn in 2007 that's going to have a huge impact on the independent film market more broadly. Facebook is a company that only a year prior had opened up beyond Ivy League membership to the public. That happened in 2006. And the iPhone has just been created. So it's a totally different era. And I guess I want to start, Tom, I want to start by asking you if you can talk a little bit about what ideal distribution looked like for you in that moment when you were buying a film, a documentary in particular. And in fact, let me even step back further. Were you even looking to buy documentaries in particular?
So at that time, I was working at Magnolia Pictures, and we were definitively in the documentary space, wholeheartedly in the theatrical space for documentaries. I think the bigger picture, from 2003 to about 2007, is the ultimate implosion of the specialized independent mini-major side of the industry, films that were released under 600 prints. That space had essentially doubled in size, and yet the box office had not doubled in size. So, it was we used to call it the chicken coop. How would we survive the marketplace? And what used to be the $1 million low-end projections for your theatrically released documentary, the cream of the crop from Sundance or Toronto, would ultimately, that would be the high mark. So what was $1 million turned into $100,000 to $300,000. But there were a few really big bright spots in there, and the year that you talk about, I would sort of assume that the height of the documentary theatrical craze in the early aughts was 2003 to 2005, which included Super Size Me, Fahrenheit 9/11, Mad Hot Ballroom, The Aristocrats, on and on and on. So things that were grossing in the teens, which subsequently hasn't really happened for the traditional art doc or the issue-driven documentary. And me personally, the movies that I was involved with were, Super Size Me is one of the biggest docs I've ever been involved in. But it was a really, I think 3 years in a row there, we worked on a movie called Enron, then we worked on Food Inc., and then we worked on Man on Wire. So while I think the industry at large for nonfiction was sort of falling off, I think Man on Wire was a year where going to Sundance, I remember being asked by Anthony Kaufman, is like, "You're not going to buy a doc at Sundance, are you? It seems like a bad idea." And I was like, well, as everybody's retreating, maybe there's something there worth buying. And I remember the interest and projections for Man on Wire. It was a very cheap documentary to buy, and there weren't many people competing for it. It was between us and, weirdly enough, Fox Searchlight, which I believe was more or less about the remake rights and doing a worldwide deal. So Man on Wire, being a wonderfully critically reviewed documentary, grossed just under $3 million. I feel like I just sat on this panel last year, same time, saying how woefully disappointed I was with that number, even though $3 million for that documentary was a great success story. In my mind, though, in the wake of 9/11, I felt that this movie was this sort of national therapy, that it was a way of re-envisioning what had happened to see these towers being built, which was this momentous moment in the movie, and a gloriously produced piece of nonfiction by James Marsh. And in my mind, that movie should have grossed $10 million. I just felt that there was a point at which we probably, as a distributor, should have reacquired the film after it grossed $2 million and spent enough money to cross over into a much wider release. We didn't do it. I mean, it wound up being very profitable for everyone, but I think that's essentially a bright spot in a pretty dark couple of years.
When you say it wound up being profitable for everyone, can you talk a little bit more about that? So it wasn't just profitable through the theatrical, it was really about the ancillary rights. And what were those rights? In 2007, what did that comprise?
Discovery originally was the commissioning editor on that film, and they retained a broadcast window. However, it was non-exclusive against an SVOD window, a streaming window like Netflix. And I can't remember whether or not we actually early on licensed that window to either Amazon, which for those days it was really early, Amazon Prime SVOD streaming, or we actually put it through Netflix, and I can't remember. But we were also, not unlike Ariana at IFC, experimenting on the day and date strategy, the premium VOD, launching it simultaneously with your theatrical window. So we experienced, I think, a really robust piece of transactional business based on getting prime real estate for smaller films that we wouldn't otherwise had gotten. So I think it overperformed transactionally compared to its $3 million box office. It also, as a classic, it very quickly became one of the best reviewed films of the aughts, and DVD sales were actually really robust.
Remember those DVD sales? Yeah.
Well, DVD is still. I still believe in DVD, and it's not a popular opinion, and I especially believe in it for issue-driven documentaries. the non-traditional circuit of libraries and community outreach groups, I think is actually quite robust if it's handled properly. So it definitively over-indexed comparative to its $3 million box office. Yeah, I can't say that it was, this wildly profitable film, but it definitively, based on winning the Oscar, I think was one of those few films that post-Oscar glory actually sustained a lot of value.
And Ariana, what did that look like back then for you? Tom mentioned the idea of premium VOD. Can you talk a little bit about that as a strategy, and was that something that you were focusing on and exploring at that point?
So back in 2007, by the way, the other film is Frank Serpico, because I forgot that just. So back in 2007, I joined IFC in 2006, so it was a good time in terms of segueing into that. And at that time, we were coming out of some bigger films. We had co-released Fahrenheit 9/11, and we had a film called Wordplay, which was a great doc, very successful doc. But we had, it was the financial crisis and crash of 2008 was looming very large. And I think we could see it coming. And it was 2007 that we actually really started the Day and Date program in earnest. And so we weren't really focused on docs at that time. I think that we were adjusting to the marketplace and the fact that it was also the year, now that I'm thinking about it, it was also the year that we had output deals with IFC TV and Sundance Channel. And Sundance Channel was still buying, doing output deals and still buying films. And those went away around that time frame. So we were really looking to, how do we maximize these films when we're buying them in terms of where they go in their television windows. And there really wasn't a Netflix that really, actively buying at that time. I think right around the time that Netflix did start acquiring, and we started to sell to them, is when we kind of got back into the doc business. Some of them were day and date, but docs at that time, at that time frame, we hadn't really experimented too much on the day and date side. That was around the time we were getting into Joan Rivers, which was a very successful doc. A little bit later, we had Finding Vivian Maier, we were more focused on sort of the awards part of it, like How to Survive a Plague. These are all films that got a lot of attention. So, and it wasn't really until we started to kind of say, well, maybe we could do some docs that don't have the weight of the theatrical expectation on it, where it is so dependent upon how much it does in theaters. Because really, at the time, for a lot of those early docs, your theatrical business was your business. And despite the fact that all boats rise in terms of performance, how theatrical, if it does well theatrically, you're raising the level of awareness, and you're gonna raise the level of home video and everything else. Really, the theatrical was the meat of it. So we did start experimenting a little bit more on the day and date with some smaller films that didn't have the theatrical expectation, that we could really get out there in the market, give it a home, and give it a space to grow if it could. And then, in the last couple of years, we can talk, I'm sure we'll talk about sort of the ups and downs of the market. Now it's really, we tailor every film to what it was. So Wiener, for instance, we loved the film when we saw it, and we thought I had never really seen anything like it in terms of the access to that kind of a politician, that kind of a public figure. It was really before its time. And so, we thought it's of the moment and it's current, so let's release it theatrically, but we'll release it on cable VOD at the same time. And in terms of doing that, we didn't jeopardize the independent theaters that it was going to play in, so it really was able to gross a theatrical gross, but also because there was such an awareness level of the subject, and because it was of the moment and in the news, we made it available on cable VOD because people would sit in their home and watch it, and it worked. That strategy worked. We released all the digital and the home video in the traditional home video window. So so that was now we really take every film and tailor it to what we think the film is. So it's not a one approach, one box. Every film is, we look at it and say, okay, it should be day and date, or okay, it should be traditional theatrical, and we go from there.
Because of the volume of films that Netflix now buys and the prices that they pay at the high end of that, they and other SVOD buyers like Hulu, like Amazon, have become a central part of a distribution plan. Can you guys each talk about your output deals and the way in which, when you buy a film, the extent to which you think about the SVOD as part of that from a commercial perspective and from the reach of the audience?
How many films does Netflix buy? Do you know? Nonfiction.
Well, so for Netflix in particular, there are two forms of deals. There's a Netflix originals deal and there's a licensing deal. So originals are the films that they buy that then get marketed both off the platform and heavily on the platform. And those are the big films that go to Sundance or Toronto or Cannes that they're acquiring. And, from what I see, they do 12 to 18 a year. Of those Netflix originals. And for those, they're buying worldwide rights in perpetuity throughout the universe.
And they get very minimal theatrical releases, right?
And they have qualifying releases. Yeah. So they qualify for the Academy Awards, which means they're out for a weekend, and if they can run in those theaters where they're qualifying, they'll stay, but they're not pushing the theatrical. Then there are licensing deals, and those deals can go from a very small amount to into significant six figures from what I've seen. And they can be worldwide, they can be one territory, and they can be anything in between. And there are so many of those that I wouldn't even know how to put a number on them.
So I, throughout my career, I've worked with everyone. Worked with Amazon, Netflix, and now Hulu. Our output deal at Neon is exclusively with Hulu, which is great.
Could I actually ask you, because I'm not sure how many folks in the audience know what an output deal is, just define what output deal is.
An output deal means the first broadcast window, or the SVOD window, or sometimes referred to as the pay one window, is the hope for every distributor is to build an output deal, and all the studios have output deals. Some independents are also able to structure an output deal. At Magnolia, we had one of the early output deals with Netflix, and when I was at Radius, we also did an output deal with Netflix. And in this go-around at Neon, I went out to everybody, HBO, Showtime, who compete for the same window, even though it's not a quote-unquote streaming window. And we wound up doing a deal with Hulu. All these deals are different. Traditionally, the value is ascribed to your theatrical box office. The rate card, or what they will pay for the film, at which point they get it, is a percentage of box office. There are minimums, and there are caps to that level of license fee. In the case of Hulu, we've structured something that's very innovative. It's very flexible. It takes into account traditionally released theatrical films. It also takes into account films that are released day and date. So we have a rate card that ascribes value not only to theatrical dollar, but also to transactional dollar based on VOD. The best part about our Hulu deal, which I don't know if this is the case with a lot of Amazon or Netflix deals today, is that they ascribe the same value to a documentary as they do to a fiction film, which is really cool. They are avidly in the nonfiction space themselves, buying premiere windows, doing a great job of it. And some of these films we have decided to pursue together, possibly as a day and date with a Hulu premiere as well as the theatrical launch. Incidentally, IFC and Ariana also have a Hulu deal, I believe. So they're a new entry in the space. They've been around for a long time, but I think supporting distributors like myself, IFC, Magnolia, and Annapurna, they've been a lot more selective about the kinds of films and distributors that they want to build their platform around. What's the what is that? Yes. Is that me? No. It's Jonathan Searing asking Ariana where she is at this point. So the value for our Hulu deal, it's a base value that we know going into any acquisition, any production, that we have a minimum threshold that we can count on, and it's pretty valuable. I think, I spent essentially 3 years building this company, 2 years in earnest, seeking investors, as well as talking to potential partners, an output deal. And I spent most of my time structuring this output deal because I think it's far less risky going into a marketplace, buying movies without any exit strategy, having no minimum value. And so with the Hulu deal, I know that we're going to walk away with, minimum X that we can expect on each of these movies. So without that, there's no way, and here's a great example. Dan produced this wonderful film called Icarus. And I was hugely interested. I thought it had theatrical value. I thought it had transactional value. I thought it had awards value. I no longer believe that because it's no longer a neon film. But at the time when it was available, if we had not had our Hulu deal, I don't think that there was any way that we as a company could have competitively put together an offer that would compete with a worldwide Netflix deal. And the value that we ascribed Icarus compared to the value that Netflix ascribed to it domestically, at least for North America, I thought was very much, very close. And, the question then became for Dan, how does he make up that difference with another potential international buyer? And so because they bought the world, it was a more lucrative deal for Dan, and, I understand why he took that deal. I was joking at the time that I was hoping that the Russians would actually infiltrate Ted Sarandis' emails so we could all see them. That did not happen, unfortunately. But without the Hulu deal, there was no way that we were going to be able to put together a competitive offer. So.
Yeah, we were in a very, very similar situation at that same Sundance with a film called Nobody Speak, where it was available for the world. Our North American offer was apples to apples to the portion of the North American offer. But a film like that, you, as a producer, you have to look at how am I going to make up the international? Who's going to buy the international? And when Netflix comes in with a worldwide offer, somebody like us or Neon or Magnolia, it's very hard to compete with the overall offer that is. So, it's a little bit of Sophie's choice for the filmmaker because it's a different kind of release domestically, but financially it's a much better deal because you're making up your international. I think a lot of producers were in that situation in Sundance. I think things might change, though.
Do either of you, are you putting together international partners that you can go into festivals with? He says, hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we will, and we'll work with Netflix gladly. We have multiple films where they are the international distributor. But there are a lot of players out there, and there are a lot of players on the traditional side that actually will buy nonfiction for the world. It just depends on that film, and it ranges everywhere from MGM to Universal to Amazon. And then there's a wonderful group of independent distributors, not unlike us, that you can form, which I have done on multiple occasions. There are incredible distributors in Australia, as well as across Europe and the UK. They have been the distributors of Amy, 20 Feet from Stardom, and have worked with certain filmmakers for years and years and years. And so, I'm interested in supporting them. And some of those individuals also have their own Netflix deals, output deals, not all of them. But for the right film and a specific kind of producer and filmmaker, there's always that moment where, yes, Netflix is offering us 3x what you are, but this was never the intent or what we believe the film or how it should be distributed. And ultimately, could it be more valuable by virtue of how we distribute it, as opposed to the very flat fee that Netflix is offering us? And, combined with, a lot of people have the, Netflix has never won a nonfiction feature Oscar. And, how do they build momentum around their films in an Academy season when, frankly, for me, had we released, which I did a movie called 20 Feet from Stardom, had we released it day and date in a manner that I think is reflective of how Netflix releases their movies, I don't think we would have ever built a momentum around that movie. That the publicity for the film in many ways was this elliptical payoff for the movie, that seeing the movie and seeing the Q&A after with the women from 20 Feet from Stardom was in its own way a self-fulfilling prophecy of, well, I wanted to vote for them because, in many ways, a vote for the film was a vote for the idea that you would see Darlene Love sing something at the Academy Awards, or that you would see them sing at the Rose Bowl, and people who saw them sing at the Rose Bowl, well, I want to go see the movie. And I'm not sure that we could have built that same kind of release with it being available everywhere day one. It would have almost made it ubiquitous in a way.
Looking towards the future, what do you see? I'm particularly interested in Facebook and Apple. Do you guys see them as potential partners? There was a story in the trades yesterday. I forget it was Facebook or Apple. It was one of the two of them that had a new nonfiction series. So my ears perked up, and then I read it's Bill Murray and his brother Brian Doyle Murray going to minor league ballparks and talking about baseball. And I thought, okay, this is great. I'm going to watch this. And then I kept reading the story, and then I learned that the episodes were 8 minutes long. So that said something about their level of commitment to the space. Do you see them becoming significant players in the kinds of documentaries that are celebrated at Doc NYC, or is it going to be much more marginal?
I definitely see companies like YouTube and Apple and Facebook and all of these behemoths becoming players. I think they're so big right now, though, that they have to figure out what their space is. We've dealt with a lot of them peripherally, and Apple is buying some music docs, which makes sense. So they're starting out in that space, which it seems like a good plan. But I think a lot of them have divisions of divisions of divisions, and I think they need to kind of figure out how they're going to move forward in terms of a strategy and an agenda, so that when filmmakers are making films and looking to the future of who is ultimately going to be the distributor of these films, I don't think there's a clear path right now to see that. But I definitely see them becoming much more involved in the future. I think that there will always be new companies coming in and creating new methods of distribution and new avenues for filmmakers to get their films or series seen. I think that original content and series is also going to be amped up even more to the extent of where it is, because I think younger generations, when you look 10 years to the future and you look at the 10-year-olds now who are going to be 20 in 10 years and how they are consuming entertainment and content, I think that short form will indeed become a bigger, even more, big than it is now in terms of series. But right now it's an ebb and flow in terms of how the distribution business goes. Netflix. I don't think I thought in 2007 we'd be competing at a festival for Netflix for multiple millions of dollars for docs, but of course it made sense. But now I think we're going into a phase where Netflix has so many films in production and so much content of their own that their appetite to buy in the open market is diminished. And so now that gives us kind of more of an opportunity to get back into that and be less competitive in terms of acquiring these films.
Can you talk a little bit about theatrical and where you think theatrical is going? And one thing that's interesting to me, actually thinking about it here, is each of your companies has their own theaters, which harkens back to a model that the Supreme Court said was not legal back in the 40s and changed the distribution business, but you're not so big that it matters. But IFC has the IFC Center in New York, and Neon Rated it has all of the Alamo Drafthouse theaters. Can you talk a little bit about what that means to have your own theaters and what you think theatrical is going to look like over time?
So we're, I feel like I've only worked at companies that own theater chains, which has been amazing. When I worked at Magnolia, we owned Landmark, and definitively owned by Mark Cuban and Todd Wagner, who own both companies. This is a little different. We have an association with the Alamo Drafthouse, but we are not owned by the Alamo Drafthouse. We're a separate company completely. But it's, the thing is, you can't, even with Magnolia as large as it was, and the Alamo Drafthouse not as large as Landmark, you can't exist with the kinds of films that we do, working with only one theater chain. We heavily depend on AMC, Regal, Landmark, and all the mom and pops. So I do think that it is. There's so much going on. I could talk about this for a couple of hours. I'm eminently fascinated by the theatrical value of our films. And one of the things that I have found most rewarding about nonfiction is that it is one of the last places where we can have an issue-driven documentary that holds an audience captive for 90 minutes plus to discuss one single issue. Where else does that happen? I think the only place that happens is in church. To have an audience together, strangers coming, having a Q&A after, mobilizing. It could be a left-leaning doc, a right-leaning doc, whatever it may be. It could be something that's completely politically, benign. But that, to me, is wholly valuable. And we will always, Neon, we did it, at Radius we did it, and at Magnolia we did it, and it's, and at Golden we did it. And the first time I saw this was Super Size Me. That, that momentum, that collective power of an audience coming together theatrically, convinced McDonald's to change their menu. I was like, oh, we can actually be a tool for social good. And being a tool for social good is actually good for business. Always has been. And, I personally do not want to lose that. And I don't think we'll ever lose that in terms of the value of a theatrical documentary. However, looking at the results of The Inconvenient Sequel, grossing a little over $3 million when the original grossed over 20, the timing seems to have been better for this movie than the original. The publicity was great. The release was great. I thought that it was handled perfectly. In my mind, that movie should gross over 10 million, in the ordinary trajectory of what a sequel should look like. And so, looking back at the last 17 years of theatrical box office for documentaries, 2017 is on track to be the single worst performing year for nonfiction theatrical films. On average, what films make today is less than what they made back in 2000. Granted, only 15 theatrical docs released in the year 2000, and we're on track to probably launch about 145 theatrical documentaries this year, which, that's an overabundance. And you understand why it's so difficult to strike any real success. But the other part is, in this year is also one of my favorite successes of the last 17 years. I'm Not Your Negro, grossing over $6 million, is extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. And that number stands next to any success story of the last 17 years. So, is the trend going in a direction that I'm not happy about? Yes. Is streaming, Netflix, the other available nonfiction, the fact that we are participants in creating content, responsible for that? Possibly. But even so, I still believe that this collective gathering for nonfiction is a really important piece of what nonfiction offers. And getting people's attention for more than 90 minutes these days around a single idea is just, where do you do it? I think this is the only place.
Yeah, I think to Tom's point, you're only going to have about maybe 5 to 10 films a year that might do any kind of theatrical business. I think moving forward, the sheer volume of films, either being made because it's easier with digital to make films, or the expectation that they all get theatrical releases has changed. But there will always be a theatrical audience in terms of the communal experience. I think that as distributors, it's going to be more of a challenge to create the grassroots swell and movement to get those audiences into the theater. And I do think that that theatrical experience won't go away. It just becomes more of a curated experience. And for us as distributors, we might buy 10 docs a year or something to that effect, but only 2 to 3 of them will really have that theatrical expectation on it in terms of how we release it and how we believe that experience will generate word of mouth and the ability to really keep the film open in theaters across the country.
One more question, then I'm going to open it up. So if anyone wants to think about a question that they would ask, gather your thoughts. One thing that we heard after Sundance was where there were a lot of significant deals for documentaries was that we're in a bubble. Do you guys perceive it that way, or do you think the market is simply getting to a level that because of all the competition, that's where it is, and the competition isn't going anywhere?
What bubble? What like?
Are people paying too much for documentaries?
I think my experience, I've been doing acquisitions for over 20 years, and there's always going to be that one person in the market who's going to overspend at a market to get a film or content, whether it be they're a new company, whether it be they're, they have to, whether it be that they need films. So when Netflix was, Netflix is a subscription service. They needed content, and they had the money, so they had to pay. I think that was one reason. I think the other reason is that they are very interested in awards. They want to find films that will win awards, as Amazon has done. So all these companies, when they were coming into the marketplace, needed content and had to pay to get it. That is going to go away with those particular companies. To your point, Apple, Facebook, Yahoo, any of these companies coming up will replace them. So, we'll have a market probably where prices are coming back to normal, and that might be for the next year or two. Every so often, Netflix will come in or somebody like that to pay quite a lot. And then new players will come in, and it's basically, it's an ebb and flow in terms of companies like us. We've been around for a long time. We've been very stable. We are not going to change our business strategy to meet these other companies. So we're going to keep doing our thing, and we're going to survive. And I think the companies that try to compete with Netflix, try to compete with all these other companies, those are the companies that, at the end of the day, are gonna go away. And that's just the natural give and take of the marketplace.
Well, I love competing with Netflix. I'm a, Ariana said this earlier, but I hate the idea of approaching this business as a one-size-fits-all industry. I mean, that's the cardinal sin. You can't treat every film the same. And, I've desperately tried to convince, the good people of Netflix to think about some of their films differently, that not every film should be simply launched on the service. They're not all the same. And that if they were to approach it differently, I think the industry would hand them an olive branch to consider. I think exhibitors would appreciate their willingness to work within the industry and still serve their own service. But I've been thinking a lot about the sort of buffet approach to film watching versus the transactional value of film watching. And theatrical value for films is very much a transactional exchange, that you commit yourself to leave your house, to pay a flat fee, to sit down and watch the movie. And once you sit down, you are unlikely to get up and walk away. And that experience changes the way you watch movies. And it allows movies to expect more from you. Therefore, they are more challenging. The minute you take that dynamic away, The minute that you are no longer a captive audience, it's easy for you to dip in and out of movies in a manner that changes the value of those movies, and it changes the experience. And, you know, we throw around the word cinema. What does cinema mean? Well, cinema to me is as much of what the movie is as how it's released. And this experience for me is what cinema is. And I think if you take that away, it changes the value of what even incredible movies are. And if you're allowed to dip in and out as you see fit at home on your iPad, the experience for that film is different. And I think that we should, you know, be very cognizant of what we do as distributors. It doesn't mean that I don't believe that certain films should be seen at home. I do believe there are certain films that are better watched at home. But I also believe that, you know, a movie like Moonlight, had it been launched on a streaming service day one, bought for $16 million out of Sundance, I'm not sure it would have become the thing that it became. And there are other subsequent examples, you know, the director prize, the film prize. The Sundance winner this year, I Don't Feel at Home Alone in the World, by Macon Blair, is, where is it? What happened? Culturally, I believe it certainly doesn't have the editorial resonance that a movie like Moonlight does, and they're not the same. Of course, you can't compare apples to oranges, but I do think that there is something about how you release movies and what they ultimately become. And I would caution Netflix to think about this, and I think they are. Notice all of their advertising this year starts, you know, Mudbound, also available in theaters. It's not just available on Netflix, and they're happy to proudly point that out, which I appreciate that. And you know, I think, you know, iTunes, which was your original question, which I never answered, is a valuable piece of how people watch nonfiction. It is also a transactional exchange. It is not a subscription value. Could it become a subscription value for film? Yes, but I think they are doing it in such a manner that appreciates the value of what film is.
Amen. Questions? Yes. The question was, can we comment on the distribution landscape for shorts? Does anyone want to take that?
So I love shorts, always have. You know, one of my early ventures at Magnolia Pictures was to figure out how to theatrically launch the Oscar-nominated live-action and animated shorts, which subsequently turned into nonfiction. And I thought, oh, wouldn't it be great to see all of these movies before, you know, post-nomination pre-awards? And Mark Cuban, God love him, he says, great, do it. I said, oh, I have no idea how to do this. And it turned into this wonderful program. And that subsequently, and it's a really profitable program, and subsequently turned into embracing also the nonfiction selected shorts. So I've always believed that there is value there, even though the industry is unwilling to definitively give it value. If you do it, they will come. So at Neon, we have created Neon Shorts, which is, you know, before every feature film that we launch, we put a short at the head of it, simply because we think this is a wonderful experience for audiences, and it's a way for us to discover new talent. It's a way for us to possibly find new IP, short films that we can develop into feature films. Because we've done that, all of a sudden, you know, Hulu is very interested in what we can do together to go out and buy short films. There are other companies that I've talked to who want to do the same. And there are a lot of wonderful shorts filmmakers who actually make a living doing it. Not a lot, but enough to say, well, there's a business here. And I think a short film at 5 minutes is sometimes much harder to make successfully than a 90-minute short film. And the last piece of that is, you know, Field of Vision, run by Laura Poitras, is this wonderful unit making short nonfiction. And you know, we've actually put one of their films, on Risk this year. And you know, I think you have to spend in order to create the revenue stream for these movies, but I think it will ultimately be very lucrative.
I mean, but I think that the real distribution's going to be on the streaming platforms, and that's, I do think, where new platforms like Yahoo, and when I said they have divisions of divisions of divisions, it's because they have these smaller companies within, like Riot, you know, some of these companies who are within the organizations who are focusing on shorts in particular, but they are buying them. I think it's just getting to, you know, those companies who are advocating. I don't have a list off the top of my head, but I think you just have to do the research of sort of, you know, looking at the shorts that are out there online and the series. I mean, I know Netflix is doing them. I know Hulu's doing them. Those are the big companies, but yeah.
Right here.
Thank you. I'm following up on what Tom was saying about theatrical versus streaming distribution. If there's a filmmaker is very, very passionate about the issue, are you saying that it is better for that issue's exposure to have the film released in the theaters rather than just straight to streaming, even if it's not as good a deal financially?
The question is, if you're making a film that's specifically focused on a particular issue, is it better in terms of raising awareness or attention for that issue to have the film theatrically released or released on an SVOD platform, even if maybe financially for you as the filmmaker it might not be as good a deal?
It's up to you. You have to decide what your goals are. And if the social impact of the film is more important to you than the sustainability of building a financial model that you can then go make your next movie, then I would wholeheartedly agree that you know, building the theatrical release for the film will have more impact. Having said that, though, and that's because I think editorially, you know, the combination of having a group together to discuss the issue, it's sort of a testimonial. You know, Netflix can make your film more widely available than we can theatrically, day one. And the question is, though, how do you build momentum around that? How do you focus your audience in a manner that you can theatrically? And if you can combine the two, that's the best version of both, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think the reality is one isn't better than the other, depending upon what your film is. And I think you have to look at who your audience is, how you're going to drive your publicity to get to that audience, and where does that audience watch these films. And then you have to weigh financially, how much does it cost to do that in terms of the PR and the marketing, and what you think it can do theatrically, or what your SVOD streaming deal might be. I think you really have to be honest about, you know, I don't look as a distributor and say, well, theatrical's, you know, as a blanket comment, theatrical is better than streaming. I think you have to look at every film individually and say, what is the best thing for this film in terms of who's going to watch it, who the audience is, where are they going to see it, and how do I use my social impact campaign, my grassroots, my PR. Is there somebody that is a figurehead for the film? Do you have a subject that can go on the road and talk? You know, I think that makes a difference whether you have that, like, you know, as Tom said, when he did 20 Feet from Stardom, you have the subject there singing, and that excites people. But a lot of films don't have that. So how do you generate that excitement? It's not an easy answer, to the extent that you really have to look at what your film is and look at past examples and comps. And, you know, the benefit of having done as many films as we have as distributors is that we have a lot of information, a lot of historical information about what these films on a financial level can do. And then, to Tom's point, the theatrical is, you have to take that leap of faith, and if you believe that that is going to generate, you know, the word of mouth and the audience.
I think that's so smart. It absolutely is about your particular film and your particular audience. And in general, I think theatrical is probably stronger for that, but there are also counterexamples. A recent one is a film by Heidi Ewing and Rachel Grady, One of Us. Tom released their film Jesus Camp and got it nominated for an Academy Award about 10 years ago. This film is about people leaving closed Hasidic community in New York and coming to terms with leaving. And what they discovered was that they sold it very early to Netflix while they were making it, and because it's on Netflix, people in that community who could never ever go to an art house theater in Manhattan or wouldn't could see it. And so that if that film had just been in a couple art house theaters around the country, what would have happened is the community would have been able to demonize them, demonize the film, control the perception of the movie in the press because so few people would have gotten to see it. But now, because it was one day, it just was on Netflix, everyone in that community could watch it on their iPhone in the bathroom secretly when the rabbis were telling them not to watch it and when they weren't allowed to watch it. And that form of distribution got past the gatekeepers of that community and has created radical change in that community and defanged all of the criticisms of it because the film is just out there. So it's very specific about the nature of the community you're dealing with, the nature of the film, how you're going to reach them, et cetera. The question is, are series changing the landscape of the distribution business? I can tell you as a financier that we started looking at series about a year ago. We still haven't quite figured it out. We're doing our first 2, and it's a little bit of the Wild West, the way that we're approaching it. And these guys, because series, you're not going to see them in a theater, you're going to see them on a cable TV platform, a linear TV platform, or SVOD. It's a little different, but absolutely every filmmaker out there is trying to figure out how can I get a series.
I mean, we don't do series, but I don't know if they're going to change the landscape of features per se, but I definitely think they have their place. I know Netflix has a lot, and Hulu have a lot in development right now. When I look at the theatrical landscape and I look at how many films are being released theatrically and how that number has grown and grown, and you have 25 new movies opening every weekend, and the theatrical revenues are dropping. Part of it is that we are competing with series. We are competing as when you as a audience member are choosing what to do on a weekend, you're either going to stay home and watch series or maybe movies or something at home, or you're going to make that choice to go out to a theater. We have a responsibility to make that choice to go to a theater easier for you, and that's our challenge as distributors to continually get the audiences into theaters. So I don't personally think it's changing it to the extent, except that it's always been a competition in terms of more content out there.
The question is, can they talk about distributing nonfiction films that aren't issue-oriented? You guys have both done a lot of that, things that are just great films. You even got one nominated a few years ago.
Did I?
Cutie and the Boxer.
Yeah. I think there are so many subsets of nonfiction that I think what this year is missing is a really wonderful art film.
Dina.
That happens to be, well, yes, Dina is one of those, which I really like that poster, Dina as Dina in Dina. Cutie and the Boxer is my favorite film from Radius. I love that movie.
I thought it was The Hunting Ground.
Well, The Hunting Ground is as a film, it's tough to watch. It's really tough. But it is, the impact of that movie is, far-reaching.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, yeah, we could talk about The Hunting Ground all day. Back to your original question, launching that across university campuses in its first window was the whole point of the movie. That, turned out to be something that was lucrative, but it was the right thing to do for the movie. And that's where the message was coming from. It's where the message needed to go. And it's where the audience for that film needed to be able to talk about it publicly as a testimonial. But Cutie and the Boxer, I bought that film 20 minutes into the movie. I just had to have it. It was these extraordinary characters with its own aesthetic, and it was an artifact. The film stood as its own piece of art, the way it was made. And that's very rare in nonfiction. And I would say that, what is a new subset of nonfiction that I'm particularly interested in is the dramatic nonfiction, and what Errol Morris has done with Wormwood this year. I think incorporating fiction elements into a nonfiction film, and where you draw that line is to be determined. I mean, it's nothing new, but I'd really like to see more of that. And I was pitched a film 2 days ago that is a crazy film. It reminded me of Lars von Trier's Five Obstructions, which is a nonfiction film, but it's an exercise. And that the documentary doesn't know where it's going to wind up, but using fiction film inside of a nonfiction frame with fiction filmmakers just was awesome. And I'd love to see more of that. So, but this year I do feel is missing like the quintessential, journey art doc.
I think there's from my perspective, there's always something within a film that you can promote. So if it's not a particularly issue-oriented film, I mean, there are many. There are many that are compilations of, I think you have to, as a filmmaker, craft how you see it in terms of who you're on it. You're making it for somebody. You're making the movie to reach a particular audience. So, we as distributors will help you and collaborate with you to figure out the best strategy to reach that. There's always something. There's always going to be something that you can angle, that you can work in terms of your PR, your marketing. Some might be more PR driven, some might be more marketing driven. Every film is really different. And then I agree in terms of how do we move forward and getting audiences in, and I think it's the kinds of films that are working, that, the Casting Jean Bonet's, the Wormwoods, the hybrid, almost like what Catfish started, and to go back in exciting filmmaking. I think that is that innovative approach to talking about an issue or telling a story is something that's really interesting.
And speaking of issue-driven docs, where are the Trump documentaries? Where
they're coming.
Where?
They're
I mean,
coming.
come on.
I don't think anybody wants to watch them. But
well, I'm desperate. My wife's running this incredible Indivisible group in Brooklyn, and they're 250 strong. They need somewhere to go. They need a movie to see. And
We're going to talk after this.
Okay, good.
The question was, how do you find filmmakers to be involved in? And through any way possible. Festivals, agents, filmmakers coming up to us directly, seeing shorts, seeing previous work, etc.
we just watch as much as we can. I mean, honestly, that's our job, is to just watch as much as we can. I might like something that Tom hates, all the better for me, because then we can run with it. We each have relationships with filmmakers. We've worked with some of the same filmmakers over and over and over again. And that's because we believe in them and support them, and that's, I think, best case scenario kind of relationship a filmmaker can have with a distributor. But we don't. I will never say, oh, I will never look at a filmmaker because they're coming from that source.
Yeah, and the percentage of films that you find sort of in the cold call submission, it's very rare. I'd say it's less than probably 2%. But we've both found them, and so the hope is that we're going to find the gem in a rough. But places like Doc NYC, every major festival is a wonderful funnel for us to determine what works for us. I would say the number one source are sales reps. There's certain very specific sales reps, someone like a Josh Braun or John Sloss that we've worked with for years and years and years, who are sort of the gatekeepers for distributors. They know us, they negotiate your deal. They work with you to find the right distribution, the right premiere for that film in order to best serve the distributors who would be interested in it. So I think they're a wonderful place to start. I recently found a documentary on Twitter, and it was an idea that I had on my own, something I wanted to do and develop. Turns out somebody beat me to it. And 2 weeks later, we had a deal and we bought it. It was great. Ariana has no clue what movie it is. It's going to drive her crazy. But, you know, you
I've got a few of those too.
uh-oh.
You know, as a company that finances films, we will see 800 projects by the end of 2017. We have an open door policy. Anyone can submit anything. You know, we'll get involved in a dozen of them, so there's not a lot. And most of those are filmmakers that have seen their previous work, something. But there are every once in a while films that come over the transom. Dina was an example. The folks from Dina reached out to us out of the blue with a rough cut. We had never heard of them before. We had never seen their previous work. We didn't know anything about them. And they just sent it in, and we watched it, and our jaws just dropped. And we felt like we had to do that movie. I mean, it's that Tom has a collector's instinct. Like, he sees something and he must have that thing. And I have the same set of emotions. And so we saw that, and our jaws were on the floor, and we were instantaneously in that movie. So it absolutely happens. One more question, I think. Yes, Deborah? Two more questions. There. So the question is, if you're making an art house documentary that's not issue-driven, how do you get people's attention? Because it's harder to get people's attention with at an early stage to get funding than it is with an issue-driven doc.
Yeah, I mean, if I had seen Cutie and the Boxer took 5 years to make, which is insane, and had him at Zach Heinzerling, if I'd bumped into him down in Dumbo, year one, you know, would I have been interested? Probably not. You know, I would say that going to find someone who is, you know, if you're an unknown quantity as a director, attaching a producer like a Julie Goldman or another filmmaker like a Laura Poitras, you know, or an Alex Gibney, you know, I think those individuals can help, you know, I think give that film some priority. While it's only cosmetic, you know, these are the things that we look for to hopefully, you know, ensure that the end product will be along the lines of what these filmmakers have produced previously. So I think that's a good way to get my attention. But had I seen Cutie and the Boxer year 3, and had I seen a selected, edited scene with some of the aesthetic that was going to make it an artifact that could stand on its own 2 feet separate of the story, I would have immediately bought into it. So, you know, I think there are ways, but yeah, Dina, you know, we didn't ultimately buy it. I do think it's an amazing movie. It just wasn't for me, but I do think Dina is, you know, that's why Dan came on early, right? And you know, Dan is not unlike us. Dan is a distributor for distributors and an investor. So he held back for Sundance. But I do think there's a large pool. I would say that there's a very large pool, a huge pool of people who want to be that bridge, the final gap, the final piece of investment in your movie to then bring it to the marketplace to, you know, upsell to Netflix or, you know, someone like myself or Ariana. So I do think that's a bigger pool today than it was 5 years ago.
I mean, there will always be somebody who's like-minded, and I think it's important to find the like-minded people. I think it gives any distributor more confidence that the film will have a place in the market. You know, when we look at films, we have to say, well, is anybody going to watch it in order for us to get involved? Because it's like a marriage. We come on board and we start spending money. We pool our resources, and you know, you have to believe. We have to believe what you believe. And I think having like-minded people, producer, executive producer on board. I would also say that I don't necessarily see it going more towards issue-driven docs. There will always be issue-driven docs, but I don't think that's where the trend is going. I don't think anybody should go say, oh, I'm going to do an issue as my next documentary, because I actually think that we're in a little bit of a interesting time right now in terms of, I think, what people do want to watch and what people will go to theaters to see. So I think, you know, I wouldn't think in that way.
I think the last few years we've actually been trending away from issue-driven docs a little bit in terms of what great filmmakers want to make and in terms of the marketplace. And I would also add that it's easy when you're out there and you're at the beginning or early stages of something to feel like, how am I ever going to get this noticed by the people who have power and distribution or whatever? But the truth is that everyone up here and every distributor, they are competing against each other for a very small number of really great things. All of us want to see something great, and when we see it, we want to have it. And in that moment, you're actually in control. And so it's easy to see yourself as powerless, but you're not. If you're making something really special, it will find a way out, and there will be competition for it. Last question. Anyone in the back who I haven't been seeing? No? I got it. The question is, when we're all pitched films, what is it in a pitch that makes us feel that that's something that we need to do? So the answer for me is very specific. It's vision. Does this filmmaker have a vision for exactly what this thing is going to be? And it's more important than the subject matter. It is there an artistic vision and an integrity behind what this person is going to do, and is it going to be special? After that, are there great characters that carry the drama that I can fall in love with or hate or in some way want to spend 90 minutes with? And if there is an artistic vision and there are great characters, and finally there is execution, like it's all very well done, even in something short, then I want it. So an example is Hell and Back Again, which is a film that I think is one of the best nonfiction films of the last 25 years. Not enough people saw it. But it was nominated for Academy Award 7-8 years ago. We saw 5 minutes of footage that was barely edited together, but it was so unbelievably unique. I had never seen anything like it. And just in the cinematography, I knew that there was a directorial vision. And after seeing that and talking to the director for 10 minutes, I knew we needed to do it. So it's really about the specificity of your vision, the characters, and the level of execution.
I would also say, is there the money shot? Is there, an inside job? There's a character who basically, or supersize me. Someone says something they should definitively not be saying on camera. Those are things that, are big examples of the money shot. Other versions of the money shot are something that you definitively have to go see it in the theater. It is a special, it's worth spending $10 and going to see. Those are things that stand out for me. I also, back to the other question, there are a certain group of filmmakers that I've just fallen in love with their work. And, at some point, have sought them out that I wanted to work with. I desperately wanted to work with Errol Morris, and we've done it twice now, and we'll do it again. And while if it's not those directors, they can be someone that you work with as executive producers. But part of that is, what is the story that we're going to be telling for 16 months on this movie? What's the editorial piece? What's the entertainment page going to be? And what does your Q&A look like? And I will tell you that you as a filmmaker, your job is only halfway done once you've made the movie. The other half is what you're going to do, especially as a nonfiction filmmaker. You're everything. That you're the voice for that film, along with your subjects, which sometimes can be a liability to the movie, depending on how you work with them. But I can tell you that when I saw Supersize Me, I was not really into the movie. I was like, it's not really that well made. It seems a little shoddy. And I stayed for the Q&A, and I was like, oh my God, this guy can sell anything. He's amazing. I totally get it. And then when I walked out, he had made this poster. He had a clear vision, what Dan is saying, for what his movie was. It was this poster of Ronald McDonald as a drug pusher. And I was like, done. This is great. We got the poster. We got a filmmaker who's going to sell this everywhere. And he convinced me otherwise. So it's not always just the movie. It's also what happens after. So.
Yeah, it's a real clarity in terms of sitting in a room when you're pitching it to know it's the vision, it's the passion, and it's the clarity that you can sell. If you can't sell the distributor on it, I'm not sure the film will then sell an audience on it.
Okay, thank you, everyone, and thank you to Tom and Ariana.
Thank you so much to our panelists, Tom, Ariana, and Dan.